evening, everyone. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm excited to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Dr. Eddie Glaude and Dr. Otis Moss III. Thank you for attending. For those of you new to FAN, there's a bit of background. We're a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on topics related to human development, mental health, education, and social justice, just to name a few topics. We have over 100 videos of past events archived on our website and on our YouTube channel too, so please be sure to explore. We have a few housekeeping notes. We are recording tonight's webinar. In a few days, the link will be sent to everyone who registered. We will also post the video on our website and YouTube channel for free public viewing. And now for introductions. Eddie Glaude Jr. is the James S. McDonald Distinguished University Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. He is the former president of the American Academy of Religion, the largest professional organization of scholars of religion in the world. His new book, Begin Again, is now number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list and rising. Yay! Dr. Glaude hails from Moss Point, Mississippi, a small town on the Gulf Coast, and is a graduate of Morehouse College. He holds a master's degree in African American Studies from Temple University and a Ph.D. in religion from Princeton. Dr. Glaude will be interviewed by Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. With civil rights advocacy in his DNA, Dr. Moss built his ministry on community advancement and social justice activism. He practices and preaches a Black theology that unapologetically calls attention to the problems of mass incarceration, environmental justice, and economic inequality. A native of Cleveland, Dr. Moss is an honors graduate of Morehouse who earned a Master of Divinity from Yale Divinity School and a Doctor of Ministry degree from the Chicago Theological Seminary. Everyone, let's welcome Dr. Moss and Dr. Glaude. Dr. Moss, I'll note that you're muted, so if you could unmute yourself, great.
Thank you very much.
Take it away. Thank you.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you to the Family Action Network. It is an absolute honor and delight to have this time to be able to interview a colleague and one I consider a friend, also a graduate of Morehouse College. And I am thankful to Family Action Network for putting this together for all of those who are joining us that we can't see, but we know that you are there. Dr. Glaude, thank you so much for being with us this evening. The book that you have written is elegantly written. Powerful, wonderful reflection. And I'm also thankful that it is now number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list. So we congratulate you on the work that you are doing. And for those who watch Trevor Noah, Dr. Glaude will be on Trevor Noah. Is it either tonight or tomorrow? Very soon. You just recorded for that, correct?
It came on last night. So.
Last night. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Outstanding. So we're grateful. Looking forward to this conversation. I want to begin by asking, when was your first encounter with James Baldwin?
Well, first, let me thank you for agreeing to sit down with me and talk about the book and about our current times. You are a prophetic voice in this time. You are leading an extraordinary church, an extraordinary community. Your voice is so important as we try to speak to the current crisis that we face. So I am honored to sit down with you. We made a journey through Morehouse. I was a little ahead of you, but we made a journey through Morehouse together. Now look at us, and we're trying to, in some ways, live our calling. So I'm just thankful that I have the opportunity to dialogue with you. I want to thank Fan and Sister Lonnie for making all of this possible. It's just humbling for a country boy from Mississippi to be in this context. But let me get directly to your question. You know, I didn't really encounter Baldwin seriously until graduate school. You know, I read in and around him while we were at Morehouse. I was there between 1985 and 1989. Of course, Baldwin's last work, The Evidence of Things Not Seen, which was about the Atlanta child murders, which happened right before I got to Morehouse. I didn't really sit down with Baldwin, and I think it was on purpose because I knew what he was going to ask of me. So even in graduate school, I found myself more attracted to Ralph Ellison. I liked his cool pose. Ellison was philosophically rigorous in his literary choices. He didn't ask for much, but more importantly, Otis, he didn't make my white colleagues uncomfortable when we talked about it, when we read it. So I didn't have to manage them as we were reading about race. Baldwin, on the other hand, oh my goodness, he left the ground scorched, as I write in the book, and he was asking much of me, and he made the people around me, my white colleagues, uncomfortable as we read it. So it took me a while to really settle down with him. I knew what he was going to do to me.
So when was the moment when Baldwin took you by the hand and he wouldn't let go?
Oh my goodness, I would say probably my first year at Bowdoin College as an assistant professor. I had been reading him because my colleagues, Will Walker, who wrote a dissertation in the religion department at Princeton on Baldwin, Lori Balfour, who was in the political theory department at Princeton, who ended up writing an exquisite book on Baldwin and political theory. Her dissertation, she wrote it while we were in grad school. But it wasn't really until I was finishing up Exodus, I was revising my first book, and I was teaching Fire Next Time. And I've taught Fire Next Time every year since I've been a professor. And I was teaching it, and suddenly Baldwin grabbed a hold of me in a way that shook me, took me at my core. It cut through the bone to the marrow. And suddenly I found myself being this vulnerable little boy, grappling with what he was asking of me. And for 30 years now, that's what I've been doing.
Wow. Now, so you said you've been teaching Baldwin for the last several years. And what's been the experience of the students who've engaged Baldwin? Let me put it this way. What is the memory you have of a student who had to confront Baldwin and then eventually absorb Baldwin?
The most amazing moment of all my years of teaching Baldwin's nonfiction, which is primarily what I focus on, was during the 2015-2016 election cycle. So we were reading Baldwin from the beginning to the end. And I was just watching my students just marvel at the prescient, the prophetic nature of his work. How can it be that he's speaking like this? It feels so relevant to our own moment. What am I to do? How am I to respond to this? Because, at the heart of Baldwin's corpus is the Socratic dictum that the unexamined life is not worth living.
Right.
And so he's an exacting companion. He's constantly asking the students to grapple with something that comes to them as naturally as language, and that is their belief in the categories that define and limit and constrain us. So to teach Baldwin in the context of the ascendance of Trumpism, after all of those years, was in some ways the most profound experience I've had with him as a prophetic writer and as a poet in the romantic sense, right? So he was speaking to the humanity of the students as the students were grappling with their own sense of themselves and their own, the scaffolding of their own lives. And at the same time, offering them language to understand the world that they inhabited. It was a profound experience in some ways.
That is powerful. That is really powerful. The examined life and the unexamined life. You begin the book and talk about the lie and how Baldwin speaks about the lie of white supremacy, the lie of exceptionalism. What are the lies that we tell ourselves in America?
I came across this passage, Brother Otis, in an essay he wrote in 1964 entitled The White Problem. And the paragraph is so powerful that I want to read it really quick.
Okay.
It says, the people who settled the country had a fatal flaw. They could recognize a man when they saw one. they knew he wasn't anything else but a man.
Mm.
But since they were Christian, and since they had already decided that they came here to establish a free country, the only way to justify the role this chattel was playing in one's life was to say that he was not a man.
Hmm.
For if he wasn't, then no crime had been committed. And then he says, that lie is the basis of our present trouble.
Mm. Mm.
So the lie is rooted in the fundamental contradiction of the founding of the modern world, the founding of the United States. That is to say, that this country, predicated upon an idea of democracy, rooted in this notion of liberty, equality, and justice and the like, right, is fundamentally predicated upon the enslavement of Black people.
Mm.
And the discourse around our capacities, our passions, our capabilities, and the like. So the lie involves the lies we tell about Black people.
Mm-hmm.
The lies we tell about what we've done to Black people and all around the world, and the lies we tell to protect our innocence. So, I say that the through line of American history is the value gap. And what is the value gap? The value gap is this belief that white people matter more than others. And that belief is evidenced in our practices, in our dispositions, in our social arrangements, in our political and economic arrangements. And so the value gap is the through line. It looks differently in the context of slavery than it did in Jim Crow, than it did with the Black man in the White House.
Right.
But the belief still obtains, the dispositions still obtain. And the lie is the broad architecture that protects that belief and the practices and dispositions that follow from it. So Baldwin says the lie that these people aren't really human beings, the lie that says that these folk are like our treatment of them is justified because they are less than.
Yes.
That lie then animates everything. And until we tell the truth about what we've done and why we've done it, then we're stuck, he said.
But I'm sorry, the question you were asking about, the lie not only deforms and distorts and disfigures democracy, it not only results in dehumanizing practices vis-a-vis us, it disfigures and distorts the characters and debases the character of those who are invested in it. Right? That's really key. We're not the only victims here, as it were. In fact, your soul, the souls of white folk, is in some ways corroded by it all.
And it speaks to the lie or the truth about the individual telling the lie. What am I hiding? I mean, I love when Baldwin speaks about the creation of the N-word. He says, I'm not that. That's not me. It says more about you than it does me. And what are you hiding by creating this? Putting this out into the ether.
I call it his revolutionary inversion. So when you read The Fire Next Time, one of the epigraphs is actually Kipling's The White Man's Bird.
Yes.
And what he's showing you there is that he's going to flip it. Right. So remember, in the letter to the nephew, he's described who are these people to want to aspire to be, right? And he describes, right, what has happened over the course of the country's formation, and what we have to endure and what we have to do in order not only to survive but to flourish. Where he says, we have to love hard, that wonderful line that Toni Morrison echoes with, we must love thick, as Setha says, right? But this moment, though, he says, but the strange thing, little fella, is that we have to love them.
Yes.
So that they can become otherwise, right? So there's a sense in which Baldwin understands that our burden becomes them. Right? The problem is not, as I put it in the book, the problem is not with Black people. The problem is not us. The problem is them. The problem is our problem with them, trying to figure out how to keep our noses above water in light of the world that has been created on the basis of this idea that white people ought to be valued more than others.
And you highlight it so powerfully in the book. And there's something that you do that I love that other scholars usually do not do, is you handle Baldwin with a sacredness. As you know, we're holding his words, we're holding his life as sacred. But you also hold the religious language, the spiritual language, in a particular way, without dismissing it. You know, this Pentecostal, this queer, this Black man who brings all of these things, but does not release not just the language, but he speaks as a person who is a poet, prophet, and Pentecostal.
Yeah.
He deploys his language in a particular way that a person in that urban environment, storefront, communicates, but he communicates with such kind of a deft way of speaking that is quite powerful. So I love the way that you hold that religious language and do not cast it in the corner as just some verbiage, because it's part of Baldwin.
Yeah, you know, if you try to read Baldwin solely as a secular figure, you're going to miss him. He's going to run past you. You know, he may have left the church, but the church never left him. Clarence Hardy's wonderful book on Baldwin's Pentecostalism, right, does some really great work in this regard. Yeah. But, you know, that's why I end in some ways the book with, you know, I don't quite end it, but it's near the end with To Crush a Serpent.
Yes.
An essay published in 1987 in Playboy magazine of all places. But there he offers an understanding of love. There he puts forward a view of salvation that really gives one a sense of the depth and reach of his how can I put this, of his religious imagination. Right. But I think at the same time, you know, Baldwin's language is rooted in the King James Bible. It's rooted in Henry James. It's rooted in the blues. It's rooted in Black English. This is what makes him such an exacting companion, because in order to walk with him, you're going to have to hear those languages. You're going to have to figure out how to become not necessarily a master of them all, but certainly to be able to recognize their registers. If that makes sense. Because at one moment, Baldwin can be speaking in a romantic register where you hear Emerson. You can hear what he's doing is bringing Emerson across the tracks. And in another moment, you say, oh, this is the Black homiletic tradition. I see the way he's riffing on Job here. That's where the title of No Name in the Street comes from, right? And you can see him riffing on that. Oh my God, look at the structure of this sentence. Henry James is all up in this man's head. And then you realize he just graduated from high school, wasn't trained, didn't get a Ph.D. And then you just got to figure out, how in the hell am I going to walk with Jimmy?
Yeah, he's just such a brilliant brother. And I wanted to raise a question as you're speaking about that, because you talk about this communication between Baldwin and King, and possibly King being uneasy, maybe because of Baldwin's queerness.
Right.
And I would ask the question and put it this way: could it also have been in addition to that, or you know, added to it, or in addition, however, that it could have also been the northern nature also of Baldwin? Here is this Northerner who has a way of communicating in an urban Pentecostal sense. And here is this Baptist Black Southerner from Atlanta who communicates in a particular way and is uneasy with a different dialect.
You know, I think that's absolutely right. I think, you know, Baldwin, of course, queers Black politics. He queers Black literature. He queers American politics. You know, I interviewed Angela Davis for the book, and she said in so many ways he was just out there all by himself for so long. And, you know, to follow up, Go Tell It on the Mountain with Giovanni's Room. Right. And, you know, he says, you know, I had to tell you. So you can't hold that over me. I told you, to give you a sense of the courage of this fragile, vulnerable queer Black man. But I think you're right. It's not only his sexuality that disturbed King and Eldridge Cleaver and others. But I also think it's the fact that he's from the North, but he's from New York, but he's not from Sugar Hill.
Yes.
You see, so the class difference is clear. King comes from Black preacher royalty. He's from bourgeois Black Atlanta. You know, Baldwin is from the hood.
Right.
And his education happened not only in the streets of Harlem, but in the streets of Greenwich Village, in the alleys of Paris. There's a different kind of edge to his voice. So he's not a Sugar Hill black man.
And there's no dap in order for him to enter into the conversation. There is no handshake for him to enter into the conversation. There is no particular organization he's a part of that says, let me give you some ease. You know, I'm an alpha, you're an alpha. You know, I went to Morehouse, you went, no, there's none of that. There's none of that.
Baldwin in 1948 leaves the United States, makes his way to Paris, and engages in this extraordinary act of self-creation. He wills himself into becoming one of America's most important writers from the ghetto of Harlem. And so you can imagine how misfitted he was. And you can imagine some of those Atlanta preachers not being too comfortable.
not at all. Not at all. It wouldn't be hard to imagine. Especially at that moment.
Exactly.
Without all of the accoutrements to say that you enter into this space in a particular way.
Right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, and I think we don't want to lose sight that he's Pentecostal, that he comes out of that Pentecostal tradition as well, and that's very important. So there are ways in which we can think about this. There's not only his sexuality, there's not only the regional differences, there's also the class differences, and then there's the denominational differences.
Now, that act of self-creation, you did something in the book, and I want to ask that you would read a portion. I sent you a note, and I will ask the question after you read this section from the book, coming from the second chapter.
Second chapter,
Yes.
Witness.
Yes.
With Tompkins walking slightly behind her, Dorothy Counts, wearing a new red and yellow dress made by her grandmother with a long bow that flowed beyond her waist, waded into a sea of white rage. She was only 15 years old, one of 4 black students chosen to integrate the schools in Charlotte. The other 3 didn't face much resistance because the White Citizens Council had chosen Harding as the place to make their stand. And stand they did. Dot Counts confronted a wave of hatred that morning, all captured by the camera of Don Sturkey, a photographer for the Charlotte Observer. As she walked toward the school, white students, their faces contorted with hatred and unmistakable glee, screamed, "Nigga, go back home, and go back to Africa, Burrhead." They threw sticks and chunks of ice. They spat on her new dress. The police refused to protect her, staying at the other end of the street and watching the spectacle from a distance. No school officials or teachers were present to calm the crowd or escort Dorothy to class. Instead, with her head held high on her lanky, near 6-foot frame, her brow furrowed with an intense stare that perhaps hid her fear, and her mouth twisted in a manner that revealed her horror and utter disgust, Dot walked a racist gauntlet to enter Harding High School.
First of all, it's so beautifully written. And I just really appreciate the way you structured that. But I wanted to ask you, why did you place it in there? And the reason I say that, I know that many scholars would have that would have been a sentence and would have moved on to talk about James Baldwin. But you took time to lift up her story. You gave us the picture. You placed us in that moment. And then you move to the connection with Baldwin. As a writer, why did you make that decision?
You know, there's a line in Fire Next Time where Jimmy describes young people, where he describes the everyday ordinary folk in the bowels of the South as the improbable aristocrats. These folk who mustered up courage from spaces that one could not imagine. So I wanted to capture, right, the depth of the risk, that this was a baby, what these grown folk did, what they allowed, what she walked through. When you see the image of her, it strikes you.
Yes.
Now, of course, the image in No Name in the Street, Baldwin tells the story in 1972 that it's that image that motivates him to leave Paris and come and to return to the United States,
Right.
he says someone should have been there with her, right? That baby should not have walked by herself. Now, she wasn't walking by herself. The family friend was behind her, but the image, I wanted to capture not only Dot Counts' courage, her regalness, her power, but I wanted to capture the venom, right? What she had to walk through. But it also sets the stage, because that image is so critical to Baldwin's book in '72, which is the anchor of of my book, because Baldwin is trying to come to terms with betrayal, loss, wound, pain, trauma, and so that image anchors, right, the trauma, and so he has to return to it even though he misremembers it.
Well, it's a beautiful passage. It's so well constructed. And when I read that, I said, I've got to ask Brother Eddie about this one, because most people would have passed by it. Most people would have given it a sentence and it would have been a footnote, but it wasn't. It becomes the gate by which we walk into another section to communicate and help us understand about Baldwin. And with that particular gate, you do some reflection in terms of, here we are with Baldwin, walking through his literary history, and then you reflect on where we are today. As a matter of fact, someone sent in a question for you, wanting to know specifically, how do we resist the lie that we witness today? How do we resist the deployment and the idolatry of the lie, and how do we live in the ruins?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The straightforward answer is you have to tell the truth, and you have to live that truth. It's like Pentecost, right? They must be drunk. It's something about the way in which we orient ourselves to the world. We have to be misfitted, right? We have to be maladjusted. So what does it mean to tell the truth in the face of the lie? That means that we have to orient ourselves. We have to live our lives in such a way that calls attention to the work, the devastation that is unleashed, the consequences of the lie, as we stand on the truth in that moment, understanding the cost and the risk. What's important about the Dorothy Counts story in this moment, in light of this question, is Baldwin is trying to pick up the pieces. So I don't focus much on the early Baldwin in the book. The late Baldwin anchors the book. That's my walking partner. And the reason why I turn to the late Baldwin is because I'm trying to figure out in my own moment, in this moment, how do I deal with my despair? How do I deal with my disillusionment? How do I speak to the fact that the country has doubled down on its ugliness again, that it's betrayed Black folk again, right? And Baldwin was writing, and No Name in the Street is the key book for me, because it's the first book he writes after the assassination of Dr. King. So he has the interviews with Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, and Nikki Giovanni. He writes a couple of journalistic pieces, but for the most part, Jimmy collapsed. And he had to pick up the pieces. He tried to commit suicide in 1969, broken relationship. He thought he was alone. No Name in the Street is the way in which he worked himself out of it. And it's a book that's all about trauma, wound, pain at the level of form. So he's trying to figure out, how do I speak in this moment that has turned its back on us again?
Right.
How do I muster up the energy to push this damn rock up the hill again? And that's, for me, I wanted to figure that out, because here we are, post-Obama, right? And the country, the vitriol of the Tea Party, voter ID laws, voter suppression, Black folk catching hell, police killing us day in and day out? How do we muster the energy to confront the fact that the country has just vomited up Donald Trump? And and so the short answer to the question is that in the midst of that, you have to tell the truth, you have to bear witness, you have to make the suffering real. And in order to do that, you have to stand right in askance to the current arrangements of things. You have to be, they have to ask the question, what's wrong with them? Or as I said, they must be drunk. Something's not right.
Now, the book also demonstrates some confession in terms of taking a new perspective, because you confess in terms of the position that you had at one point in reference to voting, and then you realizing that somebody might become president, you take a different position. Share a little bit more about that, because Baldwin was always reassessing. He was always critiquing himself. He was always raising questions. There's no static position. There's always interrogation. How did you interrogate yourself in reference to that?
Right. So, to walk with Baldwin is to understand that the precondition to say anything about the world is that you got to interrogate yourself. You got to deal with your own mess, because Baldwin believes that the messiness of the world is actually a reflection of the messiness of our interior lives. I was angry between 2008, 2016. And the anger was, the Great Recession was devastating Black America. And we had a Black man in the White House, and we couldn't speak directly to our suffering. I saw too many people delighting in getting invitations to the corridors of power. I saw people who were once prophetic suddenly become court prophets. I was worried about what would happen to the vaunted tradition out of which I come. And so I wrote Democracy in Black, and it was a scathing criticism of the Obama administration. And it was a scathing criticism of the Democratic Party, that the hell that Black people are catching isn't a Republican story. It's an American story. It's not a one-party story. It's an American story. And so I was saying, at the time the election was coming, and at the time there was Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, and I was like, look, we just came out of 8 years of the Obama administration, where we had to, in some ways, mute the issues of race outside of the Black Lives Matter movement, which kept trying to push. But we really had to mute because we were trying to protect his flank from the rabid racists who were coming at him at all times. And so I said, look, we can't just have the Democratic Party show up at a presidential election cycle and try to turn us out like cattle chewing cud. You need to come to the table with something that's specifically going to speak to the conditions, because our communities are devastated. We just lost a decade of gains. The 90s wiped out by the Great Recession in Black America. We still haven't recovered in terms of the housing crisis, the job crisis. Now we're in a Great Depression-like state, so that means we're catching double hell, right? And so I was like, yo, if they don't come with it correctly, leave the presidential ballot blank and vote down ballot. And then when they nominated Donald Trump, Otis, I was like, oh, hell yes. We got a chance to really push the Democratic Party, because there's no way these white folk going to elect Donald Trump.
Right.
And then they did. So here I am thinking I have the space in the room to push the Democratic Party to try to break the back of a kind of corporate Democratic, Democratic stranglehold on the party, or what we might call Clintonism on the party. And I'm thinking I have an opening. And then I realized afterwards I overestimated white folk. And then I reread Jimmy's piece about the 1979-1980 election between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, for Black folk, was as notorious as George Wallace. And people don't really understand that.
That's right. Yeah.
This is the man that was the governor of California during the brutal repression of the Panther Party. He was the man who led the persecution of Angela Davis. Ronald Reagan, for Black Power activists, was as bad as George Wallace.
Right.
But Jimmy Carter was the first neoliberal president.
Right.
His policies of austerity, devastating urban Black communities and urban centers, so much so that Jesse Jackson and others said he betrayed us. And then Jimmy said, you know, we fought and died, risking everything to acquire the vote, and then we realized we didn't have much to vote for. And he says, for Black folks, sometimes voting is just to buy ourselves some time. And I should have known as a lifetime, a lifetime reader of Jimmy Baldwin, man, I should have known that in 2016.
To buy ourselves some time.
And I own that. I own that, you know. I should have known that. But you know, that's what it means to be a fragile, finite human being who's not enamored with one's own voice and one's own so-called wisdom.
But you were right in terms of lifting up the fact that the election of Obama let liberals off the hook. we went into this, you know, post-racial gaze, another lie that was just wrapped up again. Again, Baldwin speaks to us, and you were spot on in recognizing that. But I thought it was quite powerful for you in the book to make the assessment and make the confession in terms of the shift, that particular shift. So that was just quite powerful.
Thank you.
What did Baldwin teach Princeton? What did Baldwin, not just your students, but what did Baldwin teach Princeton? Is Baldwin still teaching Princeton?
Probably Baldwin's still teaching Princeton. You know,
better way to put it.
I would rather put it I would rather flip it. Baldwin teaches us to wear institutions like Princeton like a loose garment. Right, to not get caught up in these spaces, right? To figure out how to exist in them on one's own terms. But he also offered me an occasion to think about Princeton's own grappling with its history. What does it mean for these institutions to have these extraordinarily complicated relationships to slavery? What does it mean for them to celebrate these rabid racists across their built environments? What does it mean for these institutions to approach the idea of building a community that reflects the world or reflects the diversity of America? What does it mean that these institutions view that as charity or philanthropic gestures, right? And how do we get the language and courage, right, to call them to the carpet in those moments, and in light of our own position, in light of our own power within these spaces, you know? But Baldwin hated Princeton. He worked in this area for a while. Okay. It was right here on Route 1 when he was a young man, because he worked on the railroad, I think up here in Belmead, and he was terrible at it. You can imagine there's images of Baldwin walking around. He was supposed to be shoveling. He got the shovel, just dragging the shovel on the ground, right? I could just imagine, you know. But right here on Route 1, a waitress refused to serve him. Said, "We don't serve Black people." Baldwin picked up a glass and hurled it at her head and shattered the glass behind her, and literally had to run for his life. And it's after that incident, right, that he realized that he needed to get out of the country, because either he was going to kill somebody or he was going to get killed, because the hatred for this world was taking root in his soul. He saw that he was becoming his father or his stepfather.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about Baldwin living outside the U.S. I mean, I really appreciate you bringing up the period while he was in Istanbul, and then also when he was in France. What did, for those who are listening who maybe not have read your book, what did those two spaces, two very different spaces, what did they offer, and what did they take away?
Well, I think the first thing they did is they offered him space to breathe. You know, I remember the The book came to me,
Mm-hmm.
the structure of the book came to me while I was in Heidelberg. I was teaching for a summer, part of a summer at Heidelberg University. And, you know, I wasn't in Heidelberg for an hour. And I talk about this in the introduction. I wasn't in Heidelberg for an hour, and I see 4 white policemen with their knee in the back of a black man screaming at the top of his lungs.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that I didn't have to go on television and talk about it. I didn't have to, at that moment, worry about my son. I didn't have to grapple with, the daily cuts. I wasn't, as it were, I wasn't their Negroes. I was a different kind of cat in this space.
Right.
So it gave me the space to breathe. And so Baldwin goes to Paris and finds space to create himself as a writer. He comes back to the US, realizes the crutch of Paris, but also realizes his misfittedness here. So he resigns himself to being a transatlantic commuter. But the whole idea, though, was to acquire the requisite distance so that he could see America, so that he could write about it. He wasn't running away from it. He wasn't in exile. That's not
right.
America was home. But he needed the space to think about it. And so Istanbul is one of those places. I mean, Istanbul stands on the cusp of the East and the West. It wasn't the Istanbul of today, right? Baldwin wasn't famous there at the time. So, he finished many of his most important books there. But it's during the period after King was murdered that Istanbul became an important place for him. Because he retreated into a community of love, a place where people allowed him to laugh those full belly laughs. And so I call it his elsewhere.
Right.
Right.
I love that. I love the fact that you frame it that way, by the way.
Thank you. And so part of what I argue is that we all need to find our elsewhere. So that we can replenish, find the space to breathe, so that then we can jump back into the fight again.
Okay, I'm going to use that in a sermon. I'm going to let you know that. Find your elsewhere. Find your elsewhere.
Exactly.
I like that. I'll send you a note when I utilize that in the message, for sure, man. And so Baldwin is in these spaces, and you share also that one of the things that runs through the book is that we've got to learn to do your first works over. So let me ask this in a couple of different ways. What is Brother Eddie's first work? What is America's first work? What is Princeton's first work?
Wow, I've never been asked that question before. What's my first works? I got to deal with the fact that my daddy deposited a fear in my gut. And I've been struggling all my life to prove that I'm not scared. When I was writing the book, I barely survived it. I've been saying that Jimmy was an exacting companion. And part of what he was forcing me to do was to confront the scaffolding of my own lies.
Yeah.
And, what was revealed is how vulnerable little boy that I am. So what does it mean to do my first works over? It means to, in some ways, confront those primal fears, those fears that drive me, that in some ways are the source of the moments when I'm courageous, if that makes sense. What are Princeton's first works? Right? What does it mean to be the Southern Ivy? How does one understand oneself as this important institution of higher learning, for much of its history, did not want Black folk there and women of color there, women generally there, poor people there? What does it mean to return to one's founding principles, but to do so in light of a more just understanding of the world?
Yes.
If that makes sense. And that holds for the nation. you know, when you read Revelations, you know, 2nd chapter, verse 5, where Baldwin gets it from, to do one's first works over, what are we talking about? Because remember, this is what I think he connects it, right? Because he cites Revelations 2:5, right? And begin again is an echo of that moment, right? So what does it mean to return to those foundational stories? What did you mean to set out to do? And where did you fall short? And why did you fall short? Tell yourself the truth about the journey to now. And figure out if you're living up to what you set out to do. And if you're not, begin again.
Yes. So if Baldwin is a part of our liturgy to do over, to fail and fail better, as you say, who else gives an invocation? Who else offers announcements in the liturgy? who else preaches in tandem? Who Baldwin with is what I'm asking. Who else is a part of this American liturgy, or this American particular these musicians that are playing together? Because I kind of think about Coltrane and things of that nature and who he played with, but who's in that liturgy? Who works that out?
You know, I want to lift up one person, and it's fascinating that you asked this question, and it's Miss Ella Baker, because I think both of them stand in this tradition that I want to call a Black democratic perfectionist tradition, and that is this assertion of the significance of Black individuality, not in the sense of some crude liberal individualist notion, but what does it mean to create the space for us to engage in the arduous task of self-creation? What does it mean for us to engage in the hard work of understanding the beauty in our brokenness? What does it mean for me to affirm the capacities of everyday ordinary people to transform their lives? You the leader you've been looking for, she said. Shut up to the students. She used to tell the SNCC organizers, shut up, you might learn something, right? What does it mean that the idea is to move into these spaces and create the conditions under which everyday ordinary folk like Fannie Lou Hamer, you know, and others could emerge as stewards of their own destiny, right? So a kind of radical democratic faith in the capacity of everyday ordinary people, rooted and grounded in a calling for self-examination, to tell the truth, not only of your own pain and wound, but that becomes the ground for you to tell the truth about the failures of the country. Right? So those two in tandem for me offer us an equation for a kind of politics that can set the stage for a more just world, it seems to me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh, it does. It's beautiful. So you made me think about Ella Baker when she says to the students, it's bigger than a hamburger.
Yeah, that's wisdom talking, Doc.
Yeah, she says it's bigger than I mean, just the simplicity of that and the power of that. I said, you are looking to sit down. We are literally looking to stand up. I mean, this is two very different things and framings of what she was able to do, and the fact that she deeply believed in the next generation.
Exactly.
She said, I want to pour my energy into those who are still living in the possibility and in the not yet. I mean,
exactly.
I love that. So that's just a wonderful, wonderful piece to.
But see, that's why I end the book the way I do. So I'm with Carol Weinstein, who was the partner of David Baldwin, Jimmy's brother, mother of Daniel Baldwin. And we go to the place where Jimmy's buried in New York. And we can't find him because Carol thought she remembered where he is, because Carol became a very close friend, and we can't find him.
That's a great story, the way you read it. I was laughing pretty hard when
I ended that way on purpose, precisely to echo the point that you just made about Miss Baker. Because, we can't find him. So we pull up, and these brothers, they're young, relatively young, multiracial. And, you know, we rolled down the window and, you know, we just, boom, it was loud, Doc. And
Right.
I mean, loud in both senses of the word in terms of, you know, pedigree and smell. And they said, no, he might be over there buried by Malcolm. And we were like, she was like, no, he's not buried by Malcolm. So we go and they sent us back. And then they, you know, we go to the home office and they draw a map for me and I follow the map. And Jimmy was right there. Right behind those young brothers. Right there in plain sight, waiting for me to find it.
Yeah, it's a great image. I was telling Monica, my wife, about that. I said, oh, that starts. I love that, the way he framed it when he comes to the end, talking about that Jimmy Baldwin was behind them.
Right there.
He stands behind the next generation. I mean, the imagery is just.
He's the wind beneath my wings, at least. Yeah.
Come on. Now, we're coming very close to time, but I want to share something with everybody's listening, and they know you as a professor, one who's a thought leader, and all of this. That we had the opportunity to meet the first time in school, and I want to share that you engaged the idea of Begin Again. So you were SGA president, and for 937 young Black men during our freshman week. For those who are not familiar with Morehouse, there is an indoctrination, a rite of passage, that initial week you make your way to the school. And here comes this small gentleman from Moss Point, Mississippi, who stands in the King Chapel and gives the students who are in the freshman class a choice to either dig it or leave it alone. To say that you can pick up the mantle of what this tradition gives to you, or you can leave it alone or leave this school. And you gave us, even at the ages of 17 and 18, the ability to be able to begin again. And so I want to thank you for the work that you are doing, the way you are blessing people across this country, and the way that you have placed Baldwin back in our collective liturgy as a country. And so I want to thank also the Family Action Network for allowing us to have this conversation together. Sister Lonnie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sister
for
Lonnie.
allowing us. Yes.
Okay, thanks so much, both of you. What an incredible conversation. There was, as you know, Reverend Moss, there were almost 50 questions submitted even before we began tonight. And then during the chat, there was, let's see, we're up to probably about another 40 some odd additional questions. I'm going to go, I'm not just going to throw a dart at a dartboard. I'm going to go with the 3 questions and try to get with the ones that a lot of people upvoted that they seem to be particularly interested in. Seems like probably the easiest way for me to thread that needle. Because there's so many good ones. I'm like, oh, that's a good one too. And I'm color coding them. And so, just to try to make my way through. So first question here. It was recently, this by Rochelle Hatcher. It was recently stated by Tom Cotton that slavery was a necessary evil. What, if anything, do you think would be a response from Mr. Baldwin?
Well, so let me just say this. I tried not to anticipate Baldwin's words, right? I don't want to exhibit that kind of hubris. I think we can read his words and simply say that's an assertion of the lie, right? Even when he corrects it, he says the founders thought it was a necessary evil. This is the context in which Cotton says he made the point, right? But the idea is to absolve himself and to absolve the country of the evil of slavery, right? Of how that particular institution indicts and convicts the country. And the point is this, is that the nation, America, always wants to imagine itself as the shining city on the hill, as the Redeemer nation, as an example of democracy already achieved. And in some ways, that particular imagining is really about thinking of America as Never Never Land. And why would I want to call it Never Never Land? Because we're populated by folk who want to be lost boys and lost girls. And what's distinctive about lost boys and lost girls is that they don't want to be responsible. They don't want to be held to account. So the idea of describing slavery as a necessary evil is a move to absolve the country of being responsible for what was unleashed by the barbarity and cruelty of that institution.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's lying. So, and depending upon if Jimmy had some Johnny Walker Black, he might have told him to kiss his ass, right? To be crude, right? So the point is that we have to confront that lie for what it is. You're lying.
A man named Cotton.
A man named Cotton.
I know.
Indeed.
All right, I'll give you 2 more questions and we'll watch our time because I know
I'll be shorter, I promise.
Oh no, you're good. Oh no, please. I'm definitely not cutting you off. I want to remind folks that if they want to join the after hours, there's links in the chat there to purchase a copy of Eddie Glaude's book. Let's try to jack it up from number 5. Let's get up to number 3. Let's just try to do that tonight. And then we can join the after hours. Your link to get into the after hours is in the receipt of the email that you get from the bookstall. So make sure when you get that receipt through your email that you check it and there's the link. So here's the next question from Barry Davis. I'm Christian and a Black male, also a Morehouse man. I find it troubling with how some white Christian evangelicals espouse white supremacy. What advice can you give me to help me reconcile my Christian beliefs with what I see as hypocritical beliefs by them?
Dr. Moss? Come on.
Come on.
Well, I would, and first of all, I want to thank our Morehouse brother for raising the question. What we witness from evangelicals, what we witness from many people who claim to be Christian in America, is simply capitalism with ecclesiastical garments, and that has primarily been the faith, the idolatry that we have deployed in this country. And the faith in which, especially people of African descent, practice is a completely different faith and theology. And sometimes we mix that and mess that up, thinking that we are practicing the same thing because we're using some of the same terminology. But there's a difference. And Gayard Wilmore deals with this so much in Black Religion, Black Radicalism, that the theology that comes out of the hull of the ship is very different from those who are standing upon the bow. And one needs to recognize one has an idolatry and bows down to golden calves, and another has to deal with the mystery, the mysticism, the power that is beyond human vocabulary.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll finish up with one last question. This is from Trina Watley. She says, James Baldwin said, as you quoted in the book, quote, "My memory stammers, but my soul is a witness." This speaks to the effect of trauma in his life. What do we need to do to deal with the impact of trauma that is currently being inflicted upon our Black boys? How do we protect their mental health?
Sister Trina, I would say thank you for the question. It was not just our Black boys.
Yes.
Right.
Agreed.
It's Black boys and girls. And the one thing we can't do is not acknowledge it. We have to begin to tell the story that exposes the scope and depth of the wound and trauma, whether it's generations of young boys and girls growing up where they're witnessing their friends die and suffering PTSD from that experience. Those of us who are grappling with that horrific public ritual of Black grief and suffering as we have to bury our dead at the hands of the police, people who've been killed by the police, and how that impacts us. So, you see George Floyd publicly lynched for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And people, many people, consume the image like pornography. But for some of us, we have to then go look at our children and worry about what's going to happen to them when they go outside, and how it has an effect physiologically on how we inhabit space and time. So part of what we have to do, I think, and Pastor, you help me here, is kind of acknowledge the trauma first. Because I don't think people like doctors, they don't acknowledge our pain. They think we're supermen and women, that we have this overwhelming capacity to endure pain. That's why they don't prescribe us pills, like pain pills, like they should. Right. But we need to tell thick stories about our wounds, because that becomes the ground for us dealing with them, if that makes sense. What would you think, Otis?
We have to face that pain, tell the truth. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that question was asked, because working on the message that I'll be doing in a couple of weeks, a letter to my son, which acknowledges that pain, that there are some things that other people must know, but will never have to have that conversation. And Baldwin, because I love the quote that you use, it's powerful, that we spend our energy placing in our child what the world is trying to rip from our child.
Yeah.
We spend so much, and that we have to spend so much time with that. So we have to acknowledge the trauma, and we have to surround them with a cloud of witnesses, literally, that will pour into them, and then make sure that they are part of institutions that see them, where they're not visible, invisible boys. We have to be able to make sure that they're in those spaces, so they recognize that I am not the problem. You acknowledge, you saying what you say about me, that's what you say about me says more about you. And that is a difficult task, because everything on a subconscious and spiritual level in this country is anti-Black.
I'm going to take that for a minute. Gentlemen, Dr. Moss, Dr. Glaude, on behalf of FAN, our community, and the 1,400 people who just tuned into this, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Moss, for your incredible preparation, your sensitive questions, just the beautiful give and take of conversation where, I've borne witness to hundreds of interviews in my work with FAN, and to just see an actual exchange of content and emotion and heart and soul all coming together between two individuals. It's such a pleasure and such an honor. Thank you so much for your service to your communities and to our community. Just really appreciate it. For all the attendees, when we send out the video link in a few days, we've gotten numerous requests from people who wanted to know if they can get the links. We've been posting so many great links in the chat. We will collate all those links, and we'll include it in that email that will then go out with the video. So how nice to have all those resources in one email. So gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you attendees for watching. We're now on summer hiatus. Join us back when FAN begins its programming again, probably in late August, early September. We have some great big announcements we'll be making for fall programming. Thank you so much. And I want to also just say, may he rest in peace, John Lewis, who did so much great service to FAN. May he rest in peace. So thank you, gentlemen. And at this point now, we'll end. Thank you. And we'll see you in the after hours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.